Thanks, Santiago, and thanks, Ethan, for a wonderful presentation. Jane Chance. This morning, it's a great delight to be here and have the opportunity to talk to you and focus on the importance, the central role that taxonomy has for conservation action, and how lack of access to good taxonomic support can be a barrier to conservation action. And I'd like to do that with reference to our work with the Caribbean overseas territories here in the region, particularly highlighting our current funded Darwin work. And just, you were mentioning Catesby's anniversary. I hope we all celebrated it. I should have mentioned it last night. It was Darwin's 250th birthday yesterday. So a shout out to him, because he's been funding, or his legacy has been funding a lot of our work. So working in the British Virgin Islands with our partners, the National Parks Trust of the Virgin Islands, and delighted that I'm joined by two of our partners here today. Also funded by Darwin, our work in the Turks and Caicos Islands, working with the Department of the Environment, and also drawing just on some earlier work in Cayman with the Department of Environment and the QE2 Botanic Park, and some earlier work with the Department of Environment and the National Trust in Montserrat. So what is in a name? Well, this audience will be familiar with the importance of knowing the species you're dealing with. The species name links all the information that we know about a particular species, but of course, names change as our taxonomic understanding improves. So tracking name changes is important. And so access to reliable taxonomic expertise is vital, because many of the places we work have had no real local specialist botanists, and that's a role that Kew feels we can really play to support emerging botanical nations. And that's important particularly because most of our conservation actions are applied at the species level, be it for identifying and conserving threatened species, be it for identifying and controlling non-native plant species, or be it for identifying and conserving species of local importance, like these medicinal plants here. And I'd like to really welcome you to the herbarium at Kew. And at the heart of our herbarium is a collection of more than 7 million well-curated specimens, which is the product of about 250 years of collecting and taxonomic research. We have taxonomic expertise in many families and regions, and slightly perhaps behind the curve, we are currently digitizing our whole collection. We've got some initial funding for that from the government, and we hope to be making this available online as a free resource by the middle of 2026. And so a kind of modern view of Kew and the Kew Herbarium is really a resource to share with the world. And just to highlight the importance and the central role of the herbarium specimen, particularly the type specimen in conservation work, I'd like to introduce you to this magnificent tree. It was first described as new to science in 1919 based on this specimen, which is in the Kew Herbarium, collected by Walter Fishlock on the island of Anegada in the British Virgin Islands, and named Acacia anagardensis after that island. Recent work with the National Parks Trust, we found very similar looking plants on the island of Fallen Jerusalem, and working with our colleague Lulu Riku at Kew, who's an expert in the family, the Leguminosae, and a specialist in American acacias. Lulu confirmed that this was indeed Acacia anagardensis, so we've now got it located in 2 different islands, which means that can inform our conservation strategy through seed collecting and establishing it in our living collections. And when there was the global revision of Acacia some years ago, Lulu confirmed its new name being Bachellia anagardensis, but we're dealing with the same taxon, the same species for our conservation work, just under a different name. And it's keeping that legacy that's so important. And because Fallen Jerusalem is already a national park and we've got a thriving population there, so we've now got it placed in 2 islands, we were able to reevaluate its red list and downlist it from critically endangered to endangered, a less threatened level. But not all of our expeditions are as successful in terms of conservation outputs. Let me show you here the type specimen of Xylosma serrata, endemic to the island of Montserrat. Its only known location was in an area of white greyed-out falls, which was under the site of the most severe pyroclastic flows when the Soufriere Hills volcano exploded in 1995. And although we remain optimistic, despite continued researches, we've been unable to relocate this species. And so FEAR at the moment, and on the IUCN red list, we have it red listed as critically endangered, suspected extinct. But you have to be optimistic in conservation. It will turn up. So really our work with partners is very much trying to help update taxonomy, develop new species, up-to-date species lists for each territory, the result of extensive field survey work and collecting. And we have duplicate collections held at Kew until the territories have sufficient infrastructure to host their own national reference collection on island. But of course, the species list is really just the starting point for our conservation work, because it enables us to do and undertake our conservation assessments and develop a red list for the territory. And the red list, again, a very collaborative approach. We'll provide red list training if needed. And you can see, for example, here, Dudley Prosper, the project manager, our project in the Turks and Caicos Islands, at Kew, working with my colleague Sara Barrios, accessing the collections and literature to do these red list assessments. But again, the red list again is just that next step in our journey towards conserving these plants, because the red list will, or the conservation status, will inform our conservation strategies, both ex situ and in situ. And seed collecting and seed banking have been very central to that, and our partners have undergone seed collecting training. Unfortunately, we're able to support long-term collections for the seeds at Kew at the Millennium Seed Bank, which is part of a global initiative to conserve the world's seeds. And currently we have about 2.45 billion seeds from approximately, or from more than 40,000 plant species in long-term conservation. And in the Caribbean, overseas territories, we've been concentrating on threatened species, and about 38% of those are now conserved at a species level, which translates to about 14% of the native flora of these territories. And the program still carries on, and our partners are working really hard on that. Ex situ, of course, at the heart of it is also this helping support and develop established botanic gardens. And here, for example, here is the J.R. O'Neill Botanic Garden on the island of Tortola in the BVI, where the team there are, from the field work, are bringing in threatened species seeds into the gardens, getting those established, establishing a conservation collection, displaying those to try and educate and share knowledge, public awareness with visitors. And as new teams get established there, we are trying to help support them with horticultural training and various other training to actually get the garden really moving. In situ conservation activities are mostly concentrated around trying to identify the most important wild sites for plant diversity using the Tropical Important Plant Areas approach, which was developed by Plant Life and Kew and our partners, and is very much a site-based approach looking to identify these key plant areas so that they can then feed into expansion of national parks, protected areas, and the data can inform legislation changes leading to better conservation outlooks for those sites. And TIFAs, we've completed that with our partners in the BVI. It's well away, it's in progress, well established in the TCI. And we've just started some work with our partners in Cayman. Genomics approaches are beginning to really open up new ways to conserve plants. So all the time we will be collecting leaf material directly into silica to preserve DNA in all our work, and using this to help improve our understanding of taxonomic issues and taxonomic relationships. But one of the things that's now challenging is how we translate that into decision-making in the field. My colleague Nancy Woodfield will be, Pasco will be talking a bit more about this exciting new project this afternoon. Getting the information out there is really key as well, making sure that our publications are accessible to all sorts of people. And this might be in the form of more formal approaches like floras or formal red lists, as we did recently with the Cayman Islands some years ago, working with the local authors, but publishing it at Kew with the new editions. And we're working currently with the team in the BVI on getting the data out there in a variety of forms. These small publications working with the media to promote the importance and celebrate the importance of plants. Capacity building is a real cornerstone for all of our work. And so it's important, a lot of our fundraising or lines and projects for bringing partners to Kew for on exchanges, the opportunities to come, spend some time with Kew, work with the collections, interact with staff, exchange information, and really to share knowledge and hone skills. So in summary, what I'm really saying is that good taxonomy is at the heart of effective conservation. The identity is key to understanding its conservation status. Conservation status informed a lot of resource allocation, and fundraising, and efforts to conserve. The identity and conservation status help drive development of conservation strategies, they're informing legislation. And importantly, they're supporting the international agreements. I'm sure we'll be discussing more about later during the week. So things like the new Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Fund. Target 4 is all about no extinction. We've also got the 30 by 30, the target to protected areas under there. So all of this vital work in botanic gardens are feeding directly into these commitments within new GSPC, which we'll hopefully be discussing some of the things we'll be discussing today. So thank you very much indeed for listening. This is really the product of a lot of people. So I thank all my colleagues at Kew, my partners in the territories, our funders, and thank you to the Bentham Watson Trust who gave me the opportunity to come and join you today. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Colin. Very much on time. Thank you very much. And we have plenty of time for questions. So please. Come on, don't be shy. Good. Yes. We came here to interact.
Thank you, Professor. What do you think about the new species of trees, for example, that are just being discovered, and it's not a criteria for the red list assessment or other similar? In terms of, I know some of them just changed the name, but many or weren't really, we weren't really aware that was a different species. It was in front of us all the time, but some of them, the majority of them, are endangered, critically endangered.
I'm treading into trees ground. We've got the specialist here with Emily's work on the global tree campaign, so I'm sure she might want to come in. But you're dealing here with a really highly biodiverse system. And that's again, as we look at different species of trees, understand their taxonomic status. I mean, one of the things, of course, the basis of the red listing, you're actually trying to assess a taxon. And so you need to understand what that is. And that's why tracking name changes can be very challenging for a conservation biologist, because particularly if some of the differences are within the realm of the individual taxonomist, because taxonomy, species description, is not a fine art. It's actually a decision-making process by the individual taxonomist. And so that's where it becomes quite challenging to use some of the new taxonomy in practical conservation. So I'm not sure if you were talking about where nearly all your species come out as critically endangered, but that may be the reality. That really may be the reality, because we've got such limited distributions or these individual trees. And so there, perhaps it gives you the thought to say, we must bring that into a site preservation, conservation approach. So the site is able to support this wide range of highly endemic, point endemics with very few individuals. So I think that's where kind of the protection of the species works within the site as well.
Any more questions? Yes.
Thank you very much for your talk. The Caribbean is said to be 72% endemicity based on, what I've been reading. Has there been any update on that percentage? Is that an accurate percentage?
That sort of split percentage is a bit difficult to really be precise on. It still is. I mean, it's at what taxonomic level that you're dealing with. But certainly there's a high degree of endemism within about 15,000 endemic species across the region. And percentages are always quite difficult, but certainly that is still a figure we use.
One last question.
Thank you, Colin. This is incredibly interesting to me as well. I guess piggybacking off Ethan's presentation, maybe you could speak to how important the historical data is to taxonomic tracking, reference historic documents that you came to access with. How important is that with regards to this tracking process? Can you speak to that?
Thanks, Danny. Great question. Yeah, absolutely. The historical documents are really vital. Just the example I used there, the not a particularly old specimen, 1919 specimen from Walter Fishlock, who was a botanist sent out from Kew to form the agricultural station in the territory at the time on the island of Tortola, and that's the site then of the Botanic Garden now. And his diaries from that time, his reports that he sent back from Kew to Kew, which were all published in the Kew Bulletin, which has been going for I don't know how many 100 years. And so, looking through there, and in fact, the reason we know that much about Walter Fishlock, as a student of mine, spent some time in the archives trying to track down information, put together a very nice little summary of the work that Walter Fishlock did. And that really is informing, some of the distributional things and some of the interpretation of some of the species today. So it really is, it gives us this insight into what, as Ethan was saying, what the habitats were like there, and what we're trying to deal with now in terms of some of our conservation strategies or restoration trajectories. Although now we're dealing with a climate compromised world, restoration is a different thing. We're not really wanting, perhaps, I'm jumping into Gunther's work here, but what's our trajectory for restoration in a climate change compromised world? But that historical data, and so the importance, so at Kew, I highlighted the herbarium, but I could really have highlighted the archives as well for some of these early, we've got some early correspondence between Darwin and Hooker, who was the director of Kew at the time, whilst Darwin was on the Beagle. All his plant information was coming back to Kew. So to understand changes, to understand distributions, and to reflect now on what our challenges should be. So yes, a big thumbs up for the importance of the historical materials.
Thank you again, Colin.